Muy buenas. Tras la reunión de la OTAN y la Unión Europea tenemos ya esa comparecencia, esa rueda de prensa ante los medios de comunicación. Está hablando Jens Stoltenberg, el secretario general de la OTAN, con quien conectamos en estos momentos. Vamos a escucharle detenidamente.
We have just signed the third NATO-EU joint declaration to further advance the strategic partnership between NATO and the European Union. This is more important than ever. Almost a year ago, hours after Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, the three of us met together here at the NATO headquarters. President Putin wanted to take Ukraine in a few days and to divide us. On both counts, he has clearly failed. Russian troops have been pushed back by the brave Ukrainian forces, and NATO and the European Union have stood united in support of Ukraine. The regime in Moscow wants a different Europe. It wants to control its neighbors, and it sees democracy and freedom as a threat. This will have long-lasting consequences for our security. So we must continue to strengthen the vital transatlantic bond in NATO. We must continue to strengthen the partnership between NATO and the European Union, and we must further strengthen our support to Ukraine. In the world of growing strategic competition, authoritarian actors challenge our interests, values and democratic principles through military, but also political, economic and technological means. China's growing assertiveness and policies present challenges that we need to address. Persistent conflict and instability in our neighbourhood undermine our security and provide fertile ground for both strategic competitors and terrorist groups. Our declaration makes clear that NATO remains the foundation of our collective defence and remains essential for Euro-Atlantic security. It also recognises the value of a more capable European defence that contributes positively to our security and is complementary to and interoperable with NATO. Today's declaration builds on the previous two from 2016 and 2018. Based on these declarations, we have developed concrete actions, and we have reached unprecedented progress in our cooperation. We are determined to take the partnership between NATO and the European Union to the next level, to address in particular the growing geostrategic competition, resilience issues and the protection of critical infrastructures, as well as emerging and disruptive technologies, space, the security implications of climate change, foreign interference and information manipulation. Our partnership will become even more important once Finland and Sweden become full NATO members. With their accession, NATO will be protecting 96% of the citizens in the European Union and a higher share of its territory than ever before. We encourage the fullest possible involvement of the NATO allies that are not members of the EU in its initiatives. And we encourage the fullest possible involvement of EU members that are not part of the alliance in its initiatives. So dear Ursula, dear Michel, dear Charles, thank you for your personal commitment.
Estábamos escuchando ahora a Jens Stoltenberg, secretario general de la OTAN. Entre los mensajes principales que está destinando en estos momentos, insiste en que Moscú, como régimen, lo califica como un régimen, quiere en estos momentos una Europa diferente. Dice que es necesario en estos momentos que tanto la OTAN como Europa sigan estrechando, fortaleciendo sus lazos. Insiste en que la OTAN va a seguir apoyando, ofreciendo su apoyo a Ucrania y, sobre todo, insiste en la OTAN como una figura de defensa colectiva. Dice que en la declaración conjunta, en ese documento de cooperación que han firmado todos los miembros que estamos viendo en estos momentos, Charles Michel, Ursula von der Leyen representando a la parte europea y Jens Stoltenberg representando a la OTAN en su conjunto, han firmado un documento en el que detallan unas acciones concretas. Insisten que ahora mismo hay que llevar esta cooperación al siguiente nivel para lograr un progreso sin precedentes. Está hablando en estos momentos Charles Michel. Vamos a escuchar.
Stronger. NATO has to reinforce its presence in Eastern Europe, and it will have 2 new members, Sweden and Finland. Putin wanted less NATO, but he has achieved the opposite. He will have more NATO, and he will have more EU. We are also getting stronger. We are speeding up the enlargement process with the Western Balkans, and we took the historic decision to grant candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova and the European perspective to Georgia. And we are reinforcing our European defense. For the first time in history, we provided little military equipment to Ukraine through our European Peace Facility just a few hours after the start of the war. So far, we have reached more than 3 billion euros, in addition to the massive military contributions of our member states. Since day one, we have stood by the people of Ukraine with strong military, financial, diplomatic, and political support. Together, the EU and its member states have contributed nearly 50 billion euros. And second, Russia's war against Ukraine has brought the EU and NATO closer together. In fact, we are closer today than ever. Both our organizations have recently raised our ambition by upgrading our strategies for our future security, the EU strategic compass and NATO strategic concept. Our organizations are complementary. NATO is and remains the foundation of collective defense and essential to Euro-Atlantic security, and the EU is determined to contribute more effectively to global and transatlantic security. With today's declaration, we want to take our cooperation to the next level to ensure peace and stability, intensifying our cooperation in new areas such as protecting critical infrastructure, space, the security implications of climate change, and foreign information manipulation and interference. We Europeans, we want to take more responsibility for our defense, and that also means we enforcing the European pillar within NATO. EU leaders agreed on a clear strategy at our meeting in Versailles last year in March. We developed a strategy to bolster our strategic autonomy and European sovereignty. We agreed to spend more on defense and to strengthen our industrial capabilities by investing more in our defense. Making Europe stronger makes NATO stronger, because strong allies make strong alliances. Thank you again, dear Jens, for your commitment in taking this cooperation forward. You can count on the EU. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And then I give the floor to President von der Leyen, please.
Thank you very much, Jens, dear Charles. Indeed,
Bueno, ahí teníamos las declaraciones de Charles Michel, presidente del Consejo Europeo. Habla Ursula von der Leyen, enseguida la escuchamos. Vamos a resumir un poquito lo que ha dicho Charles Michel. Insiste en que en estos momentos Europa y la OTAN están más unidos que nunca. Dice que en estos momentos los europeos quieren tomar una mayor responsabilidad de su propia defensa, que han acordado gastar más en defensa y que en estos momentos hacer a Europa más fuerte también haría, por tanto, a la OTAN más fuerte. Bueno, como ven, unos mensajes bastante magnánimos los que están dedicando en estos momentos tanto Jens Stoltenberg como Charles Michel. Vamos a escuchar en estos momentos a Ursula von der Leyen, que, como decimos, ya está hablando.
Support of the Ukrainian people, but also against Russia's imperial war. Since then, our unity and resolve have only grown stronger. We have already been very close partners, of course, before Russia's brutal war. So we have been testing and coordinating our crisis responses through many, many exercises we've had together. We have increased our cooperation against cyber attacks for better military mobility, destination, address cyber attacks against Latvia organized by the Lukashenko regime. I remember a joint travel to the region with you, Jens. By the times we're living in, we know that we have to strengthen and now deepen this more than 20-year-old partnership, because Europe's security is challenged and it is under threat. And this is also reflected in the wish of Sweden and Finland to join NATO. We look very much forward to Sweden and Finland becoming NATO members soon. It's also reflected in Denmark's abolishment of the opt-out clause related to EU defence. All this shows we are aware of the challenge, but we're able to stand up against it. The Russian threats and challenges are the most immediate, but they are not the only ones. We also witness China increasingly attempting to reshape the international order to its benefits. So we must bolster our own resilience. And with this new joint declaration, we're also taking our partnership to the next level. We will deepen our excellent cooperation and expand it to new areas. I would like to look at 4 of them very briefly. The first one is that we will further intensify our work on countering hybrid threats and cyber threats, as well as terrorism. We have already a very close cooperation, but we want to broaden and deepen it. The second is we will step up cooperation on emerging and disruptive technology and space. We do a lot already together, but we can do much more. The third domain is we will address the looming security implication of the climate crisis. Sounds a bit far away, but we are fully aware that with the climate crisis and the extreme weather events like droughts and floods, we see more and more the phenomenon of fostering instability with all the consequences of poverty, of unrest, of instability of whole regions, and therefore this is also a point of focus for us together. And the fourth point, of course, we will strengthen our resilience. The resilience of our societies against malign foreign interference to manipulate information, and crucially, the resilience of our critical infrastructure against all types of attack. The Nord Stream sabotage has shown that we need to take more responsibility for the security of our network infrastructure. And there too, we are aware that the individual countries are responsible for the security of this infrastructure, and for sure we will not share vulnerabilities, but best practices, experiences. This is a field where we can work closer together, and we will intensify the cooperation. The European Union will keep doing everything in its power to support the brave people of Ukraine. We will keep the pressure on the Kremlin for as long as it takes with a biting sanctions regime. We will extend these sanctions to those who militarily support Russia's war, such as Belarus or Iran, and we will be coming forward with new sanctions on Belarus, answering their Belarus role in this Russian war in Ukraine. We will continue our substantial humanitarian, economic and security assistance to Ukraine as long as it is necessary. And of course, there's the topic to boost European defence capabilities as laid out in the strategic compass. For that, we all know that now we need to ramp up the production capacity of our defence industry, and we need to coordinate the replenishment of military equipment. On all these topics, I look forward to working with Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson under the Swedish presidency of the Council of the European Union. And of course, we will discuss this and much more tomorrow with you, Jens, when you will be visiting the college. Many thanks.
Okay, we'll start with Financial Times.
Atención, porque Ursula von der Leyen, la presidenta de la Comisión Europea, ha lanzado algunos mensajes contundentes en medio de esta rueda de prensa. Ahora están empezando ya las preguntas, a plantear preguntas los distintos periodistas, medios de comunicación allí presentes. Enseguida escuchamos las cuestiones, las respuestas, pero antes vamos a hacer una recapitulación de lo que ha dicho Ursula von der Leyen. Insiste en esta necesidad de fortalecer la alianza entre la OTAN y Europa para garantizar una seguridad de Europa que, ha insistido, en estos momentos está bajo la amenaza de Rusia. Dice que las amenazas por parte de Rusia son inmediatas, pero insiste en que Rusia no es el único país que en estos momentos está amenazando la seguridad de Europa y de la OTAN. Ursula von der Leyen apunta a China, al gigante asiático. Insiste en que en estos momentos es una amenaza el hecho de que China esté intentando reordenar o reformular el orden mundial. Así que insiste en que Europa y la OTAN tienen que ir al siguiente nivel a la hora de fortalecer su alianza, su cooperación, que es necesaria expandirla a nuevas áreas, intensificarse. Por ejemplo, en el término de las ciberamenazas, ha hecho mención a la necesidad de reforzar esa ciberseguridad ante posibles ataques de terrorismo cibernéticos. También ha mencionado los retos, las implicaciones de la crisis climática y también la necesidad de reforzar su resiliencia. Ha mencionado el sabotaje al Nord Stream, que esto pues pone todavía más en relieve la necesidad de tener una mayor responsabilidad en materia de seguridad. Y atención, porque ha hablado de sanciones, de nuevas sanciones, y en este caso apunta a aquellos países que están ofreciendo apoyo a Rusia. Habla de sanciones a Bielorrusia y a Irán. Como decimos, estamos ya en rueda de prensa, están planteando cuestiones a Charles Michel, a Jens Stoltenberg y a Ursula von der Leyen. Vamos a escuchar.
A number of us were there, and the EU was able to very rapidly activate its peace facility in order to provide weapons to a country, to Ukraine. And I think that this is, in a way, the birth of European defense in a very effective manner. And then there's also technological sovereignty. There's a more of an economic approach, which we did not discuss today. So just to confirm that this whole notion of autonomy, of independence, is very important in order to have more resilience going forward. And it is quite clear that this is something which needs to be done in complementarity with our friends, partners, and allies. And we do this with NATO. And I said this at the time, and I would repeat that today. Strong allies create solid alliances, and that is what we're doing today. We are reinforcing the EU, we're reinforcing NATO, and this reinforces our unity in the face of a threat which we are dealing with because of this war which was started by Russia.
On Finland and Sweden and membership of NATO, in NATO, I'm confident that the accession process will be finalized and that all NATO allies will ratify the accession protocols in the parliaments, and that also goes for Turkey. But let me start by just reminding you all about what has happened so far. This has been so far the quickest accession process in NATO's modern history. We have to remember that normally accession processes into NATO takes years. Finland and Sweden applied in May last year. Already in July, all 30 allies, including Turkey, decided to invite Finland and Sweden to become full members of NATO, and all 30 allies also signed the accession protocols. And so far, 28 out of 30 allies have already ratified. This is quicker than ever before in NATO's modern history. Then what paved the way for this historic decision was the agreement between Turkey, Finland and Sweden that was also signed on the margins of the NATO summit in Madrid in July, where they agreed to work more closer together. Finland and Sweden agrees to lift restrictions on arms exports. That has already been done. And they also agreed to work more closely in the fight against terrorism. That is also taking place. They have established a permanent mechanism where they exchange more information and intelligence and they are working more closely in how to address terrorist threats. Turkey has legitimate security concerns. No NATO ally has suffered more terrorist attacks than Turkey, and therefore it is something which is welcomed that the NATO allies, Finland and Sweden, are working more closely on these issues. And then let me add one more thing, and that is that we have to understand that Finland and Sweden, they are in a very different place now compared to where they were before they applied for a NATO membership. Since they applied, several NATO allies, including the United States, have agreed bilateral security arrangements, security assurances for Finland and Sweden. NATO has increased its presence in the region, and as invitees, Finland and Sweden are now participating in NATO's meetings, ministerial meetings, ambassadorial meetings, meetings of different NATO committees, and Finland and Sweden are more and more integrated into NATO's military structures. So it's inconceivable that Finland and Sweden will face any military threat without NATO reacting to that. So I'm saying that I of course see the importance of finalizing the accession process with the ratification in both the Hungarian and the Turkish parliament. But I'm also saying that I'm confident that will happen, and that we have already moved a very long way in a short time with Finland and Sweden.
Can I perhaps add a few words on the topic of strategic autonomy? A lot has happened in the last year.
Está hablando en estos momentos Jens Stoltenberg de Finlandia y de Suecia, de las amenazas que están pudiendo sufrir en estos momentos ambos países en medio del proceso por intentar adherirse a la OTAN. Insiste Jens Stoltenberg en que la OTAN, los aliados y mencionaba el caso concreto de Estados Unidos, están ofreciendo en estos momentos todo el apoyo y la asistencia necesarios a ambos países para evitar en cualquier situación pues, que pueda darse esa situación de amenaza seria para estos dos países. Vamos a escuchar mientras tanto a Ursula von der Leyen.
Or was our toxic dependency on Russian fossil fuels. We have basically completely gotten rid of it during this year. Coal, completely. We have wind down Russian oil, and more than 80% of the Russian gas has been cut. We have been able, and that's strategic autonomy, to diversify our supply chains to trusted and like-minded partners, and of course to ramp up the own production of energy. We have doubled the deployment of additional renewable energy in the European Union, and this is independence. Renewable energy is not only clean and affordable, but independence. Then we have been working because we saw a growing dependency on semiconductors, on the CHIPS Act, also a success story. We are preparing the Raw Materials Act because we see the same challenge what the supply of raw material is concerned, too much focused on one region of the world. And we have developed Global Gateway, also to build up these partnerships with like-minded on the whole energy topic, for example, with the Global South. So a lot has happened in the topic of strategic autonomy. Final point, defense. We are working now with the member states through a task force, jointly with the EEAS and the European Defence Agency, to figure out what are the needs for the replenishment of the stocks, and what does the industry need to cater for it, because it takes two here, not only the demand, but also, of course, the supply side. And this is another step forward in organizing and harmonizing a European common defense answer.
Okay, we'll go to the Ukrainian news agency, Ukrinform.
Thank you for the floor. Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. I want to mention that Ukrainians are grateful very much to both organizations, both to EU and NATO, for practical solidarity. My question is that the both organizations now have the common problem of depletion of military stocks. because nobody expected the war in Ukraine of such a scale. My question is, what is the practical cooperation between NATO and EU in filling that gap? And the second part of the question, as the Russians now mobilize reservists and preparing some kind of a future advance, will EU and NATO be able to be in time and prepared to assist Ukraine in this battle which could be decisive? Thank you.
Maybe I could start by saying that you are right that NATO allies and EU members have depleted their stocks to provide support to Ukraine, and that has been the right thing to do, because this is also about our security, and of course we need to use our capabilities, our stocks, our ammunition to support Ukraine. And I've also been asked, and I've told NATO allies that if they had to choose between meeting all the NATO guidelines on stocks, on capabilities, or to support Ukraine, it's more important to support Ukraine. And therefore, we have been able to provide an unprecedented level of support to Ukraine over many months. But of course, when we are depleting our stocks, there is only one long-term solution to that, and that is to produce more. And that's also the reason why NATO defense ministers took decisions to increase our stockpiles of munitions and equipment when they met last fall. We have also a long-standing defense planning process and capability targets for each and every ally, including stocks and ammunition. And we are revising them to ensure that we have enough stocks both to protect our own territory but also to provide support for Ukraine. And we are also working with the European Union. We had Commissioner Breton here just before Christmas, and we are on the staff level looking into how we can coordinate our efforts, because this is about ramping up production, of course, in EU, NATO allies, but also in allies that are not members of the European Union. And we have engaged directly with the industry, and they are now ramping up production. The aim is, of course, to ensure that we can continue and also strengthen.
Bueno, le preguntaban a Jens Stoltenberg de qué forma o en qué consiste de una forma práctica esa mayor cooperación entre la OTAN y Europa. Jens Stoltenberg ahora decía, bueno, hemos sido capaces de ofrecer un nivel de apoyo sin precedentes, tanto en cuestión de nuestra defensa propia como sobre todo de dar apoyo, munición suficiente a Ucrania. Insiste en que ahora mismo pues hay que aumentar la capacidad de defensa de la OTAN, de sus aliados, pero insiste en que ahora mismo se están encaminando hacia esas vías, hacia la de poder garantizar un mayor apoyo a Ucrania, pero también tener su propia defensa cubierta.
Extremely important message that we are sending today with the declaration, with the two presidents here present with me, that we stand united, NATO and the European Union, in our support to Ukraine.
We're running out of time, but we'll take one third question, which is DPA.
Thank you. Ansgar Hase, German press agency, DPA. A quick question to all of you on the ongoing discussions on weapon deliveries to Ukraine. Do you support member states that are considering sending Western main battle tanks like the Leopard 2 or the Challenger 2 to Ukraine? Or do you fear that there's a huge risk of escalation? Thank you.
I have said many times since the beginning of Russia's invasion in Ukraine that I think that Ukraine should get all the necessary military equipment they need and they can handle to defend their homeland. And this means, of course, advanced air defense systems, but also other types of advanced military equipment, as long as it is necessary to defend Ukraine, because they also defend the basic principles of the UN Charter, of the fundamental rights, and of the international law. And I've said that at the very beginning of Russia's war, and I have still this position, of course.
Let me just add that that what we have seen is that we, NATO allies, EU members, have provided Ukraine also with advanced weapon systems since the war started. And I welcome the new announcements just over the last days by the United States, Germany, France, to also provide new types of armored vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, and other types of armor to Ukraine. This is important. There is a constant consultation within the alliance between NATO allies, but also with Ukraine. We will meet next week in Ramstein in the US-led contact group to provide support to Ukraine, and there we'll meet with the Ukrainian defense minister to discuss exactly what types of weapons are needed and how can allies provide those weapons. So in addition to armor, we have also provided advanced air defense systems, as President von der Leyen Ursula just referred to, and also long-range missiles with the HIMARS. And all these systems are making a huge difference on the battlefield every day. I welcome the focus on systems, but I think we need to also realize that this is not only about adding more systems, more platforms, more weapons, but also ensuring that the platforms, the weapons we have already provided are working as they should, meaning that we also need to ensure that we provide the necessary ammunition, the spare parts, the training, the maintenance of the systems which are already provided. And therefore, yes, it is important to address what new systems do we need to provide to Ukraine, but also to ensure that all the systems which are already there are working as they should.
There is an aggressor, this is the Kremlin, and there is a victim, this is the people of Ukraine. And I'm very pleased that in the recent weeks and months following the start of the war, the member states were able to deliver more and more military equipment to Ukraine. And like Ursula said, I fully support the same approach. And the European Council many times repeated the call on more military support for Ukraine in order to make sure that they will be able to defend their side, because we know that they are fighting for their future, but they are also fighting for our common values.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry we can't take all the questions we have, but this concludes this press conference. Thank you.
Termina, por tanto, ya esa rueda de prensa conjunta. Jens Stoltenberg como secretario general de la OTAN, Ursula von der Leyen como presidenta de la Comisión Europea y, finalmente, al presidente del Consejo Europeo, Charles Michel. Hemos podido ver esa declaración, esa rueda de prensa en la que, pues insistimos, recogemos algunos principales mensajes. Bueno, postura muy clara, y además ya escuchaban ahora mismo a Charles Michel. En estos momentos nuestro objetivo es claro: hay un agresor, que es Rusia, y hay una víctima, que es la población ucraniana. Bajo esta premisa, la OTAN y Europa están en estos momentos estrechando lazos, insisten en que van a seguir avanzando hacia el siguiente nivel, decía Jens Stoltenberg al principio de esta comparecencia, en esa cooperación entre ambas partes. Entre los principales mensajes que nos dejaba Jens Stoltenberg, el secretario general de la OTAN, insistía en que en estos momentos Rusia quiere una Europa diferente y que ellos no lo van a permitir. Insiste en esa necesidad de fortalecer los lazos, en seguir apoyando a Ucrania, y en esa declaración que han firmado hoy la OTAN y Europa hablaba, como decimos, de dar un paso al siguiente nivel en esa cooperación. En el caso de Charles Michel, insistía en que Europa en estos momentos quiere tomar mucha más responsabilidad de su propia defensa, que han acordado pues proveer una mayor defensa a través de una mayor partida de gasto para fortalecer esa parte, que hacer una Europa más fuerte, decía Charles Michel, pues también va a hacer que la OTAN se fortalezca. Sin embargo, quien daba en ese discurso inicial los titulares quizás más potentes ha sido Ursula von der Leyen, porque la presidenta de la Comisión Europea ha sido muy clara y además también ha insistido en la necesidad de unas mayores sanciones. Recordemos que ya llevamos 9 paquetes de sanciones frente a Rusia. Existía también esa necesidad de fortalecer la alianza, pero también la seguridad de Europa. Decía Ursula von der Leyen, ahora mismo Europa está bajo fuertes amenazas. La amenaza inmediata, decía, está en Rusia, pero aludía también a otro país que puede suponer una amenaza también clave para Europa y la OTAN en su conjunto. Y mencionaba, en este caso, a China. Y decía Ursula von der Leyen, China supone en estos momentos una potencial amenaza porque estamos apreciando cómo está intentando darle otra forma, decía reshape, al orden mundial establecido hasta el momento, al orden mundial tal y como lo conocemos. Y, como decimos, Ursula von der Leyen ha hecho mención a la necesidad de nuevas sanciones y ha apuntado a aquellos países que están ofreciendo apoyo a Rusia. Ha mencionado, por tanto, a Bielorrusia y a Irán. Ha insistido Ursula von der Leyen en que la OTAN y la Unión Europea van a extender sus sanciones a estos países. Así que nos quedamos, por tanto, con estas claves. Importante, esa declaración conjunta de la OTAN y la Unión Europea es una de las claves del día, de las principales referencias que, por supuesto, vamos a estar vigilando y analizando aquí en Negocios Televisión. Así que muchas gracias por habernos acompañado.